17 years after he was indicted, Ratko Mladic finally faces charges of genocide. But as the tribunal enters its final phase, will there be justice? And will it serve as a deterrent for those who, in 2012, continue to wage war against their people? Mladic on trial. This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Kamahl Santamaria. Our focus is on two places today, the former Yugoslavia and The Hague, but with one common factor, Ratko Mladic. The former Bosnian Serb general has faced his first day in The Hague in front of the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, charged with genocide and war crimes. His fate probably won't be known for years, but his trial is the last for the ICTY. A good time then to measure its success or otherwise in holding to account those involved in the Balkans conflict. Has it brought justice? Will it act as a deterrent in the future? All that to come after Barnaby Phillips' report on day one of the Mladic trial.
Ratko Mladic is defiant, even if physically he's a shadow of the general who fought a war and the prosecution says was responsible for terrible crimes. The prosecution argues that Serb atrocities were not spontaneous, but part of a plan to remove, to ethnically cleanse Muslims and Croats from land that Serbs wanted, and that Ratko Mladic was an integral part of this plan.
Your Honors, 2 decades ago this past month, Bosnian Serb leaders commenced an attack on their fellow citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Civilians who were targeted for no other reason than they were of an ethnicity other than Serb. Their land, their lives, their dignity attacked in a coordinated and carefully planned manner. In some locations, this attack arose to the level of genocide.
Ratko Mladic listened intently, but he never showed remorse. Bereaved women had travelled here from Bosnia to set eyes on the man they blame for killing their sons, their husbands.
I'm quite happy that Mladic looks much better than last year, actually. And I had the feeling that he was much more concentrated than last year. And he looks much better. So I hope that he can last and that he can survive this court case.
And see justice.
And see justice. That's exactly what the mothers are waiting for.
Officials at the court are concerned that this case should not drag on for too long. But we are talking about events of great complexity which took place in many different towns and villages in Bosnia. So the trial of Ratko Mladic is likely to last for years. Back in the courtroom, the evidence continued. A long list of atrocities, including some harrowing audio and video clips. The prosecution will continue its case on Thursday. The success or failure of this trial will go a long way to establishing how the UN court is perceived by generations to come.
But while Mladic faces the court, the battles which put him there are still so fresh for the people who witnessed them. Have listened now to just one person who saw the Srebrenica massacre with her own eyes.
Ratko Mladic, I've seen in Podgorica where I begged him to let my son go. He promised that he would release my child, but he lied to me. As an officer, as a general, he lied to me. We are living witnesses. We want to know all that will happen in The Hague and what the trial will look like.
So a question for the day, does Mladic's trial mean that justice has been served or indeed will be? To help us answer that and more, 3 guests. In New York, first of all, Muhamed Sacirbey, who's former Bosnian ambassador to the United Nations. In London, international criminal lawyer Toby Cadman, who's also a former special advisor to the chief prosecutor of Bosnia. And in Belgrade, Slobodan Samar-dzija, a journalist at the Politika Daily newspaper in Serbia. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time on this first day, as it is, of Ratko Mladic's trial. Let me go to New York first and talk to Muhamed Sacirbey. Is there, looking for positives first of all here, is there cause almost to celebrate or at least be pleased with the fact that we got here? We are now 17 years since the indictment of Ratko Mladic. It took a long time, but it did happen.
Yes. Unfortunately, though, I think the time does bear consequence in a sense that both the victims and I think the world in general have much lower expectations. I'm really not here focused on whether General Mladic will be found guilty. I think that's almost a foregone conclusion because he himself has admitted, and with pride, with a smirk, to the crimes that have been committed. The question is, what are the consequences for the victims themselves as well as justice? Is justice done if, in fact, the perpetrator, and many on whose behalf he claims to speak, still view him as a hero? And, in fact, are the victims themselves just playing a second role, if you would, to a courtroom drama? What benefit do they have from this beyond just some sort of sense of satisfaction after 2 decades?
Yeah, so it may not even bring closure in that sense. As you say, with the trial or the result almost a foregone conclusion, there's not much in it for the victims at this point, so long after the fact.
Well, the prosecutor, I think, has done a good job of speaking of really a plan of genocide, a state-sponsored plan of genocide, one that extended from Belgrade to Pale to really present-day Banja Luka. And that plan of genocide continues to be executed today, because actually, as Mladic goes on trial, the people in places like Srebrenica, the refugees who were originally from Srebrenica and now have been ethnically cleansed, that is displaced, they can't not only go back, but they can't now even vote in the elections for the next local council and mayor. So the process of genocide, in effect, continues. And I think it's a problem not only for the Bosniak, that is the Bosnian Muslim victims and the Croat victims, but I think it's also a problem for the Serb people of Bosnia themselves, and for that matter, Serbia, in the sense that I still don't think they have a real picture of what happened, and there's just a real sense of denial, or an us versus them. And I don't really want to talk here about an us versus them thing. I want to talk about how the victims can walk away with this feeling a sense of humanity, but also in some way receiving a recognition, compensation for what has happened to them.
Okay, we'll come back to that more a little bit later. Toby Cadman in London, let me bring you in. Courtroom drama or the real deal?
Well, it's a very interesting question. It's a question which has been asked many times now over the past few months. I think it is very, very important that General Mladic does face trial. I do agree with the last speaker, Ambassador Sacirbey, that there is a sense that it is a foregone conclusion, and that obviously does impact upon whether the proceedings will be perceived as being fair, and whether Mladic will have an opportunity to properly defend himself. There obviously has been concerns raised by the defence as to one of the judges in particular, Judge Ori, and his participation. As I understand, that complaint has now been dismissed. But the judges are going to have a very difficult time to ensure that General Mladic's rights are respected in the trial process, but at the same time, by preventing him from using this as a political platform, which is to be expected. Even on the first day of the trial, it hasn't been without controversy with Mladic making gestures towards the public gallery. So it's going to be a very difficult process to manage. And that also sort of opens up the question of whether an international justice mechanism such as this is the right way to address the problem. That's obviously a bigger discussion.
And that's again, that's something we'll come to later in the programme. Sorry to interrupt you. Slobodan Samar-dzija, if I can bring you in Belgrade. Both our guests have brought up the idea of this trial being almost a foregone conclusion, but I do want to talk about the defence, because it is a trial. The man has the right to defend himself. And his defence essentially is that he was defending his country. What else could he do? How will that be met? I mean, does it have any weight whatsoever?
Well, if you talk about it, the interesting thing is that on this May, we had set anniversary of attacking the military vehicles in Tuzla and in Sarajevo. That was the military convoys. There were convoys from of Yugoslav army, so-called Yugoslav army in that time, and they were withdrawing, and they had they had a right to withdraw, and they had approval of the at that time Bosnian authorities. But you know what happened? The people started to shoot the military vehicles, and many people have been killed. And so you cannot say that the thing is only so clear, and that the atrocities were done only on one side, or that was a very hard time. I know, but you know, the victims were from all sides. But of course, the international justice has to say it's.
What about Mladic's actions? Just Mr. Mladic's actions himself. He will say he was following orders. Was he?
Well, you know, in such circumstances, people who are in charge must follow some orders, of course, but they have to do some things on the field by themselves, the decisions by themselves. So I don't know if Ratko Mladic had the orders to shoot the people from Srebrenica or something else, anything else. But of course, that was there were such circumstances, and he did it in his own way. It's his own way. Of course, it doesn't mean that it was not a crime. It was a crime, of course. But I wouldn't say that the orders came from here or from there. I believe that he did it in his own way.
Let's go back to New York. Muhamed Sacirbey, if I can bring you back in there. Go back to a point which you brought up a little bit earlier, and the idea that maybe it's not about, well, of course it's about what happened all those years ago, but it's about the fact that so little has changed for those people. There is still this separation. There is still, if you're a minority of any sort, things haven't changed in many ways.
That's unfortunately the case. And again, I really wish to refrain from speaking as a member of any one ethnicity. I recognize there were victims on all sides. I recognize that people suffered on all sides. But there was a unique plan set into motion by Slobodan Milosevic and Ratko Mladic, and it came well before May of 1992, which was mentioned here, of actually creating ethnically clean territories. In effect, trying to create of Bosnia something that it was not before, which is an ethnically divided country. Unfortunately, today, it is very much an ethnically divided country in terms of territory, in terms of politics, in terms of economics. Used to be, before the war, probably a more integrated country than the United States even. Now, after the war, it is one of the countries that is most divided by religion and ethnicity, and clearly this is not a very stable situation. And beyond the sense of people still feeling no closure, no obviously relief or remedy, there is a sense of ongoing grievance. And I'm afraid that part of that is because the international community in particular has been not very consistent in how it projects what happened 20 years ago. On the one hand, they want to put people like Milosevic up for trial, rightfully so, and Karadzic, and let's mention Milosevic in this case as well, and of course Mladic. But on the other hand, they allow the fruits of that genocide, the fruits of the crimes of those individuals to very much remain in place. And that's what defines Bosnia, is the fruits of Mladic's genocide.
Gentlemen, let's pause just for a moment and think about the ICTY itself here, because this is essential to what we're talking about. And this trial really is the last roll of the dice for the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. I think it is worth thinking about what it's actually achieved in its 19 years, and we'll take our viewers through this as well, just so they know. Based in The Hague, of course, in the Netherlands, established in 1993, it is a United Nations body to prosecute serious crimes committed during the Balkans Wars. It is, just to note, completely separate from the International Criminal Court. Two of the biggest targets were, and we've talked about them already, the Bosnian Serb political and military leaders, Radovan Karadzic, Ratko Mladic, who were indicted for genocide in Srebrenica in July 95. Their trials began in 2009 and 2011 respectively. Then, of course, the former Yugoslav president, Slobodan Milosevic, who Muhammad just mentioned, indicted in May of 1999 for crimes in Kosovo. The first indictment it was against a sitting head of state by an international court. His trial began in 2002, but Milosevic died in his prison cell in 2006. In total, here are the numbers. The tribunal indicted 161 people. Of those, 126 were sentenced, 13 acquitted, 3 died in custody, 36 cases were terminated. And as for the costs, well, the ICTY has an annual budget of more than $150 million. Costs almost the same as the ICC. And just for one note, Mladic's trial is set to be the last before the ICTY is closed down. So I go to Toby Cadman in London for his view. If you look at those numbers, and this is a slightly crass way of putting it, but it's not a bad strike rate. They've actually gotten through the amount of indictments. They've got a lot of sentencings. Does it show the ICTY to have been effective in its time, do you think?
Well, obviously you can't underplay the importance the ICTY has played in international justice. It's played a huge role. In terms of whether it has succeeded what it intended to achieve, then I think the international community is slightly divided, the international criminal justice community is slightly divided as to what it has achieved. It is a huge amount of money in terms of the number of cases that it's dealt with. What has been potentially a failure of the ICTY is potentially the role it's played in the region, developing capacity in Bosnia, Croatia and Serbia during the extent of its mandate. I also think it's failed largely in, rather than, a lot of the criticism is that it's obviously focused on just one side of the conflict. It's only focused principally on Bosnian Serb defendants, and the way that it has addressed crimes committed by Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Muslims has come under a great deal of criticism. It's tried to obviously balance its work and tried to balance the cases that it's brought, but that obviously causes difficulties in itself, because cases should be selected on the basis of their importance and the level of the perpetrator, not on creating any public relations campaign to ensure that you are properly perceived.
But as far as Mladic goes on his own, sorry, if I bring in this idea,
sure.
You've said obviously this has been a sort of a one-sided thing, but if we just look at the Mladic trial, is there something to be said for going more local? I'm thinking almost of the way it is in Libya at the moment. You know, you've got Saif al-Islam, Gaddafi's son, and how the NTC wants
sure.
him tried in Libya, yet Luis Moreno Ocampo wants him in The Hague at the ICC. Is there something to be said for going local, if I put it that way?
I think there is. I think there's a great deal to be achieved by having more localised justice, provided there is the capacity at the local level and where required or where needed the necessary level of international support, be it by having international judges and prosecutors and financial support. But I think there is a lot to be said for having a localised justice. The Bosnian War Crimes Chamber, where I was based for several years, that was the intention of that institution. It was effectively to take over a number of cases from the ICTY that it literally did not have the capacity to deal with. And it played a very, very important role in bringing justice to the victims. They had greater access to the court. But there are other examples. Libya is an example. Kenya is another example. Kenya currently before the ICC. There's a huge amount of criticism of that case, that it should be dealt with locally, either within Kenya or regionally. But when you compare a case like that to Mladic, for example, and certainly when I was in Bosnia, and I was in Bosnia up until 2009, there was discussion about whether those cases of the senior, the most senior leaders, Karadzic and Mladic in particular, of whether those types of cases could be dealt with at the local level. And there is obviously some concern as to whether there would be security. Now, former Ambassador Sacirbey mentioned the continued division in Bosnia, and that would play a very, very important part in determining whether having localised justice was important. And it was certainly one of the questions that was raised several years ago when it was being considered whether some of those trials could be dealt with in Bosnia.
Okay.
I'm pretty much tied on whether a case such as that should be done at the local level. I think, assuming that there is the capacity and the will to do it at the local level, then that is an area that should be pursued.
Right. Let me go back to Slobodan Samar-dzija in Belgrade, because Toby Cadman actually echoed a thought which you put forward before, the fact that this is almost a little bit one-sided. Is that almost a failing of the ICTY, that it will always be viewed just from one side? and that there is more to be gained by broadening the scope, or would that just stretch it out even longer?
Well, I can tell you that the general feeling in Serbia here is that International Tribunal is against Serbs, of course, but you know, it is the feeling that we got only because some prominent people are from Serbia and from Bosnian Serbs are there. But I think that these things should be solved on local basis, and of course the biggest players must go to international laws, not just because it is only one place where they can be judged rightly, but as an example for other countries, of course, and other situations. But the problem is that some trials that are going on here in Serbia or concerning Bosnian war are also haven't been finished yet. So there is a lot of things that must be done, obviously, before the thing has come to an end. Obviously, there is no much intention to solve these problems properly, not only on international tribunal, but in local tribunals too.
Gentlemen, we are starting to run down the clock a little bit. I do want to get some final thoughts from all of you, though, just on this one final idea. I raised the point very early in the show talking about current leaders, world leaders in 2012 who continue to kill their own people. The obvious one you look at are the likes of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Mohamed, if I come to you first, what do you think someone like Bashar al-Assad thinks when he looks at Ratko Mladic facing the international, well, it's not the International Criminal Court, but a similar body to that? Do you think it acts as a deterrent to the likes of him, or that these types of leaders will always just be, they will stand in the face of this sort of justice?
Of course, it's not just Bashar al-Assad. There's a whole hierarchy, the whole regime that's behind him. And I think they believe they got their whole bet in. So in other words, it's all or nothing. They do understand that they have gone way beyond what would be accepted, certainly in civilization and certainly under international law, so that they really, at this point in time, are going to go as far as they can to maintain power. But I actually do believe the international community has missed an opportunity by not pursuing Assad's indictment before the International Criminal Court. I do tend to disagree with this notion that somehow some of these matters can be handled locally, especially in a country that is war-torn right now like Syria, or of course the former Yugoslavia, where so much was divided in terms of perceptions, in terms of institutions, and in terms of course leadership. When we look back at the example of the ICTY, it was in fact the first of its type, since certainly the Nuremberg trials. So it did give birth to the Rwanda Tribunal, gave birth to other tribunals like Cambodia, in effect, the Sierra Leone, and most importantly, the International Criminal Court. And I think we have to see this evolution process to the end. There are some people, though, who say peace and justice are inconsistent, that you have to kind of opt for one or the other. So in this case, there's a lot of people who are saying, well, we have to find a way to make a deal with Assad. I don't think so. I think until, in fact, justice does prove to be the dominant force in global relations, that I think we will have people like Assad continuing to press the point because they think they actually can get away with it.
Toby Cadman, quick final thought from you, because I am running out of time. What do you think? Is this a deterrent?
Sure. I mean, with the case of Bashar al-Assad, no, I don't think it serves as a deterrent, whilst he has the protection of Russia and China in terms of a Security Council resolution. Whilst he's out of reach of the International Criminal Court, then he will continue to act with impunity, and I don't really see the deterrent effect of some of these mechanisms. But I just did want to focus just on one final point.
Just really briefly, Toby, because we are running out.
Of course, I do understand. I said at the outset that you cannot underplay the important role the ICTY has played, and I completely agree with what's been said, that it has been pivotal in the advancement of international criminal justice, not without its criticisms, but it has been pivotal. And also the final point about the whether it's been one-sided. I don't necessarily believe that it has been one-sided, but I think it's something that needs to be considered, that you cannot pick and choose cases just to create a balance. So
all right then, Toby.
The final thought is that it is vitally important.
Got to jump in there because we are all out of time, but thanks to all our guests on Inside Story today. In New York was Muhamed Sacirbey. London, you saw there Toby Cadman. In Belgrade was Slobodan Samar-dzija. We thank you all. We thank you as well at home for watching this edition of Inside Story. Feedback always welcome. InsideStory@aljazeera.net is our email address. I'm Kamahl Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for watching.